What to do, geography students? Originally, I wasn't going to do this, but Brooklyn Zimmerman asked, and then I felt like if I didn't do this, then I was treating my psychology students with favoritism. So here it is. Unit 4, technically Global Change Unit 3. So for paper 2 in IB Geography, there's 3 units. We also did urbanization already, which is part of paper 1. So I call it Unit 4, but it's technically Global Change Unit 3. First off, you've got your unit organizer, cover sheet, study guide. Okay, these are the things that you'll be asked about. The command description is, or the command term is kind of going to be the like amount of depth you'll need. So outlining something is not as much depth as describing versus like analyze and explain is going to be a little more, giving some specific examples, things like that. Here are the big overarching questions. They follow the 4 Ps. You got the 3 topics. So our 3 topics were global trends in consumption, impacts of changing trends in resource consumption, and then resource stewardship or possibilities for the future. So anyway, keep this handy because these are stuff you have to know. One thing you're not going to be asked about on the test, but we didn't get to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They come up again in another unit, and I just want to move on. So we'll move on, and we'll do that later. So if you want to cross that one out for now, that's fine. But they definitely, when you learn about them, they'll come back around. You'll see them fitting in together. So this is just, I have all of these in Teams. These are just the slideshows that I made specifically for Teams. And I'm going to go through them quick and kind of talk about, it's hard because it's a very broad unit. I can't talk about every single thing that you're ever going to see. So it's a little difficult, but this is a really good video. If you go back to the slideshow, which talks about how poverty has changed over time and how global poverty just in general, we actually did it with the juniors this morning, is down to about 8.3% of the world is in extreme poverty. So even less in poverty, and you can see some different patterns related to that. So here's some terms to know. When we talk about categorizing the world in terms of economies, we usually say emerging world or emerging economies or middle income / newly industrialized countries. They're the same general concepts that are kind of just referring to a little bit different things. Income is about how much that country takes in either GDP or GNP, and newly industrialized kind of means like their economy itself is shifting. So it's a little bit different. International poverty line is the amount of money under which an individual is considered to be in poverty, and that's set by the World Bank and the UN. The World Bank's part of the UN. And then poverty is a state of deprivation. And they always relate it when you're looking at a global scale to purchasing power parity, which just means like you want to take cost of living into account when you're talking about these things. So that's what purchasing power parity is, because one place where cost of living is very high might have a lower poverty rate, but if cost of living is very high, it's not going to be captured as well as it would in another place that's at lower cost of living. This is breaking down just like the spatial variation of the world by income. You can take a look at that map if you'd like. It's kind of the same trends you see throughout geography, which is you've got the global north, and then a lot of what we call, quote unquote, the West, the Western Hemisphere and Europe, kind of dominating the global income spectrum. But then a lot of nations are already in this middle income category. Talk about this too, distributions of poverty. I won't spend a ton of time going back over this, but you can check that out if you want. Global middle class is a common term that you need to know. It generally means the middle of the social hierarchy, which means the middle fifth of a nation's income ladder. So you're including everyone but the poorest 20% and the wealthiest 20%. So global scale, we would be fitting people into this criteria across regions of the world. There's a little thing that determines if you're in the global middle class. You see the majority of the growth in the global middle class over time has come in Asia and the Pacific. You see in the rest of the world, Africa is still kind of lagging behind, and then Latin America and the Caribbean is 2.3% as well. But a lot of that growth, the global middle class is growing, and a lot of that growth is happening in Asia and the Pacific. There's another good video that you can watch. It's just global trends. Again, rise of Asian middle class. You see most of that growth is going to be coming from Asia. That's a good example of spatial difference or spatial interaction. Once again, growing middle class. Okay. We also did an activity on ecological footprints. Again, ecological footprint, I don't know if I actually went through it. So ecological footprint is talking about the amount of resources needed to sustain a group of people over time, or a person. If you want to look very locally, there were some activities where you looked at changes in the ecological footprint, how that relates to food, water, energy / land, or food / land and energy. We also looked at like what your ecological footprint is. So there's a good activity in there that you have related to that. Then we looked at patterns of water, land, and food / energy consumption. One big concept related to water is that it's unevenly distributed across the world. There's over 780 million people in the world that don't have access to clean water. High-income countries tend to maintain or increase their consumption, especially in North America and Western Europe, whereas other places have a little bit more of a struggle. There's several things that are leading to increased water use, especially as nations grow in income and enter into the global middle class. Embedded water, which means the water that goes into making the products that are imported and exported and consumed by the population. That's why it's called virtual or embedded water, because it's used in the process of making those things. Heavily involved in shipping, especially. So globalization, global trends, and becoming more interconnected. See more shipping, more imports and exports. Agriculture, obviously, developing the food, using hydroelectricity, water for power, and then just daily, regular, sanitized use of water. So nations that have the political structures, the technology, the money, the income to be able to sanitize water, they're all going to, who have the ability to practice sustainable agricultural techniques, they're all going to have access to more water resources in general. Again, here's how different countries use water by income. So industrial use of water increases with GDP, economic activity. Much of the water demand is going to come from low-income countries that are industrializing. And here's some trends impacting increasing water use. So if you forgot some of those, check those out as well. This is just the thing about embedded water and where it's coming from, different types of embedded water. Patterns in food intake. One big thing is the intake of meat has vastly increased over the past century. Several reasons for this: urbanization, people moving to cities, going to restaurants. Growth rates of food production and crop yields have been falling in general. It's led to more like meat being used, more land going towards meat. There's different ways to expand crop production, but expanding the area, multi-cropping, often using irrigation, which means using the same location for multiple crops, and then using any type of technology or high yield varieties or GMOs. Patterns of energy consumption, talking about renewable versus non-renewable energy and how we've had an increase in demand from newly industrialized countries. As you can see, the trend generally is that the newly industrialized middle-income countries are driving a lot of the growth of consumption, and the high-income countries are maintaining that growth that they had before. Some are actually decreasing, though. Some are decreasing as they're becoming more efficient and putting more money into renewable energy and clean energy. So anyway, we did a whole bunch of, we had an activity where you did a chart with the 3 things on each side, and you went through and used these resources. So I would take another look at that as well. And I think that pretty much does it for that topic. So that's 4.1 in a nutshell. Just overview, take a look at your resources as well for that. And then I'm going to just check, where I'm at. That's a newsletter. Get out of here. Check where I'm at for my time, which the longer I take to figure it out. Oh man, it's gonna be a part 2. Carly Inception right there. Carly. Okay, anyway. 4.1's Dunsky. We're gonna go 4.2. I got 20 minutes. This was all about climate change. There was a lot less to this because a lot of what we did with this was you looking at different connections on your own, but we were talking about the water, energy, food nexus and how those things are a system, and it piggybacks off of the end of 4.1, looking at those trends. So we kind of talked about, we read this article about it. It's on, I think I gave it to you. Then we watched this video clip about the energy nexus. But basically, we're talking about 3 types of security: water security, access to safe drinking water and sanitation, having the political capital, the industrial capital, the will, and then obviously the population densities to support it. Food security is the availability and access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food. And then energy security is access to clean, reliable, affordable energy sources for these types of things. Nexus thinking means the interactions. Here are a couple examples of interactions, but you got to be able to think of how can we see these things fitting together and working together, and how one part of it impacts another part, which impacts another part, which impacts another part. Don't always have to do the connections as all three, but you need to know at least like how one connects to one other one. There's a current event activity I did, and I can't remember. Oh, you went and found a current event that you thought was related to it. Here's some ideas for different types of connections. That were some video clips that we actually didn't use. So that's cool. We did the hexagonal thinking activity. I'm hoping that you took a picture of it, or at least wrote down some key takeaways about how they connected. There they are again, right there. Here's a good conclusion. You can pause this and read it. I'm not going to read it to you for the sake of time, but I try to put in every P and scale and spatial interactions so you can see how they're kind of fit together. Climate change. Talked about how climate change can be unpredictable. Here's a good graphic. It's on your note sheet. Whereas sometimes climate change can lead to a greater access to water and food. And sometimes it's going to lead to less access to water and food. Some areas are going to have to reduce agricultural productivity. Some are going to see an increase in it. Some will see diminishing water supplies. Some will see an increase. Climate-related shocks will become more frequent, though, and the impact is going to have impacts on the others. So this is a good example of how, like, snowpack, for example, can impact water supply, which can impact energy supply, so on and so forth. These are some adaptation methodologies. You don't have to memorize these, but we kind of just talked about what synergies or connections we see between different ones. Then, this is key, we did an activity and an assignment where you looked at the United Arab Emirates and Switzerland and how they were different from one another. We also had the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam. We did a current event, talked a little bit about it. You got to know some specific examples of how different countries are being impacted and how their food security, water security, energy security are going to be impacted, because you might be asked for a specific country, to talk about a specific country you learned about. Then the last thing we did for this topic was resource disposal and recycling. So we talked first about like how some places import trash and why they do this. Sometimes it's because they make money off of it, they get trade deals, but they also might just have the infrastructure and the technology to do it more cleanly, so places send them. So there's kind of two ends of the spectrum there. We talked about what do you throw away in a day and how does it relate to this pie chart. Solid domestic waste. This is a key chart here. We're talking about why are these things the best and why are these things the worst, and how do we do them? So we're talking about eliminating the demand altogether, all the way down to returning it into the earth, like carbon sequestration or a landfill in a relatively environmentally benign way. So those are different ways of having waste disposal. We also talked about like where the waste is coming from. Again, same old trend, though the United States actually has quite a bit more than a lot of countries its size or like its income level. We talked about strategies, recycling, reduction, reuse, composting, incineration, landfill, exportation of waste. So those are some common ways of doing it. We talked about some trade-offs of those different kinds. So you got to know about a couple different methodologies. And then when I was gone, you should have done the e-waste infographic practice and looked at where's e-waste coming from, what is it. It's a big thing that they will randomly ask about. Where is it going? Why is it such a big deal? So make sure you check in on those infographics. They're right here. You can go through them again yourself on the slideshow, and I had some questions as well. There's also a video we didn't get to watch in class, which is a case study of what Ghana is doing with importing waste and how they're dealing with it. It's a good example of a low-income country trying to deal with importing other waste from other places. All right, let's see if I think I'm going to have to make a two-parter. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll make a two-parter, so I'll be back with part 2 in a bit.